First of all, thank you very much for coming out and putting up with the high humidity here. Summer is here again, so it's great to see you here. First, we'll do the Indigenous land acknowledgement. So McGill University is located on land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. McGill recognizes, honors, and respects these nations as the traditional land stewards of the lands and waters on which we meet today. So today it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. George Philippidis from the University of South Florida, who is the Associate Dean of the Patel College of Global Sustainability and the Director of the Biofuels and Bioproducts Lab.
Thank you.
Dr. Philippidis started with a BSc in Chemical Engineering from the Aristotle University of Thessalonica, and he then moved to the States. So I asked him this morning why he did that. He said that somebody told him that Greece was the cradle of the civilization, but for the next 2,000 years has faced some challenges. So he then decided to leave the cradle and moved to the University of Minnesota, where he did his PhD. He then went on to do an MBA in the University of Denver. From there, he moved to the U.S. Department of Energy National Renewable Energy Lab in Denver, where he was looking at genetic engineering of algae. From there, he moved to Thermo Fisher Scientific in Boston, and then he finally went to Miami and to become the Energy Director of the Applied Research Center, which is the business arm of the Florida International University. And I think his last move was across the peninsula to the University of South Florida. And this is the fourth largest public university in the state of Florida. And one of its rankings in 2011, it was the Intellectual Property Owners Association placed USF as the 10th among all the universities worldwide in the number of US patents granted. And perhaps Dr. Philippidis will be talking to us about some of these, because I know he holds quite a few.
Great.
His recent publications have included the effects of macronutrients on phospholipid production by the microalgae Nanochloropsis in a photobioreactor, and a special issue on energy policy for the future of the small islands developing states, in which he did a commentary. So he really does embody the spirit of transdisciplinarity that we are promoting in the MSSI. So with that, I'd like to welcome George Philippidis, and I'd like you to join me in acknowledging him. Thank you.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Thank you, Heather. I would like to thank the Institute, the MSSI, and also the Faculty of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences. Very glad to be here. It was not really necessary to simulate the Florida summer environment in here. I could have done without it, but I did have to take my jacket off and may have to remove the tie pretty soon. So this is not my first time at McGill. I did a Fulbright scholarship project here 3 years ago, but it was at the Mac campus on sustainable agriculture. It's always great to be here. Two of my favorite places in Canada are Montreal and Vancouver, and I would rank, for obvious reasons, Montreal a little higher than Vancouver. But no, it's great. And what I would like to talk today is some of the work that we are doing at USF in my team on developing renewable resources for a sustainable society and a sustainable economy. And let me jump directly. Before I do that, actually, already Heather has covered this, so I'm going to jump over the stuff. I was going to give you some information about my background, but it's a lot of chemical engineering and, of course, business. And then, as she mentioned, NREL. One other thing I did while I was in Miami, the last point there, I worked as a clean tech venture capital partner. So it was a great experience trying to help startup companies in the cleanup sector, clean tech sector, we were evaluating their business proposals and deciding whether to fund their operations. So very good experience. And now I'm at the Patel College of Global Sustainability. And this has been in existence for only the last 5 years. It was created in 2014. To my knowledge, it's still the only sustainability college in the country, in the States. I think there is also a sustainability college here in Canada. You would call it a sustainability faculty, perhaps. So I will talk at the very end of my presentation. I'll give you some more information about the program, how this program in sustainability works at the College of Sustainability. And some of the highlights, as I mentioned, very proud of being here and being hosted at McGill for my first Fulbright. The second one I did was in Taiwan. So trying to bring experiences from other countries into our curriculum and also into our research, and working with forming relationships with faculty and businesses around the world. And I have been advising the US Department of Agriculture, State Department, OAS, Organization of American States, where I have run into colleagues from Canada, Brazil, and other countries, the entire hemisphere here, and also private sector. So what really is the basis of the work we are doing is sustainability. I'm sure you are all familiar with the term, the capacity to meet our needs while preserving our ability to meet the needs of future generations. We are targeting on maintaining our standard of living, however, without and not at the expense of the environment. So that's the whole point here, is can we maintain our way of life, which we obviously appreciate a lot, without degrading the environment. And as a result, we are not trying to maximize just prosperity and profits, but we're trying to maximize the combined function of those three: people, which is the social component; planet, which is the environmental component; and profits or prosperity, which is the economic. So it's the overlap in the Venn diagram, is the overlap of all those three areas. And in the last few years, through international efforts, we have developed a number of sustainability criteria, which are very important because they will be our guide as we move forward to implement sustainability in every sector of the economy that we are. All of us come from different areas, and we work together, and this is what really the economy consists of. Some of those criteria are rather obvious. Greenhouse gas emissions. Everybody's talking about, except for the inhabitants of the White House, everybody's talking about, greenhouse gas emissions and how we can contain them and eventually try to reduce them. But equally important are human and labor rights, as well as rural and social development. Those are very important things. Food security, conservation, and then soil, water, air quality, land rights. So a lot of criteria that we need to take into account so that we can, as I said earlier, maximize or optimize all of those at the same time, not just a subset of those things. And just to remind you that things like poverty, it's a very busy slide, so just look at the, if you want, at the highlighted words: poverty, food security, biodiversity, soil degradation, groundwater, the air quality, environmental and human health. All these are very essential. If we are to become sustainable as a society, we have to pay attention. And they are all interrelated. And that's the beauty. You almost get into this interdisciplinarity of sustainability. You are forced to, even if you don't want to. Because poverty is related to rural development, both here in Canada and in the US. Poverty is mostly in rural areas. If we can develop technologies such as biofuels, what is going to happen in rural areas? That's where the raw material is. So that means we're going to fight poverty, less movement, less migration towards the cities, also less migration from poorer countries to richer countries. So all those things are interrelated, and I think that sustainable ways of doing business will contribute to the improvement of the global society. So we are striving for a sustainable society, and we are using hopefully prudently. That's our goal, renewable resources. We also call them ecosystem services. Nature, Mother Nature is already providing those to us. What we need to do is we need to find ways to convert them into what we need, as opposed to manufacturing and polluting the environment with the waste we are manufacturing synthetically. And those resources include microorganisms, animals, fish, crops, and forestry. My work focuses on the prudent use of microorganisms. That's why I highlighted that. And in the research that we are doing, we are truly combining biology, biochemistry, and a lot of engineering. I would expand that to social sciences when we talk about policy and when we talk about human rights. So it's missing here. I should edit. Social sciences are equally important to natural sciences in a sustainable society. So those technologies for a more sustainable economy, which we call bioeconomy. So anything bio means it comes from nature. That's the terminology we use. The idea there is to eventually do away with petroleum and rather focus on algae, biomass, I will explain all those terms, and oilseed crops, preferably non-edible crops. And a good part of the work that we're doing in my group has to do with developing this green box, developing sustainable processes that will allow us to produce those renewable products. And there is a variety of those products we're looking at. We're talking about biofuels, but that's not the only thing. And let me step back for a second. You may have heard about ethanol as a biofuel, right? You may have heard of biodiesel. There is also aviation fuel. That's a very exciting project that I will describe briefly. We're developing renewable aviation fuel. And we have already tested it in commercial airliners. You may be flying or have flown on a flight that has a mix of conventional jet fuel and biofuel. So next time when you exit the plane, ask the pilot. See whether you can get some information from him or her about the fuel they used. We can make plastics. There is a huge need about bioplastics. And we are working on that through organic acids, short molecules that can be polymerized. We're developing nutraceuticals, cosmetics. As we age, I will need some more of those. And I would like them to be natural, okay, not synthetic. Animal and fish meal, fertilizers. There is an increasing demand by developing countries such as China and India. They have huge middle class sectors. Bigger, the middle class of India or China is bigger than most countries around the world, just the middle class, with a huge demand for meat, protein, source of protein. So how are we going to do that? We need to raise the animals. We need to feed them. And where is all this protein going to come from? Fertilizers for agriculture, as well as cleaning up the environment, the water, bioremediation. So these are not necessarily all, but a good part of technologies that can be developed and serve the bioeconomy. So focusing more on my group, I mentioned algae. You can see some of the species we use. It's not important. As important it is the advantages and challenges that we're going to discuss a little later about algae. Agricultural biomass. If you're not familiar, Canada has a lot of forestry biomass. Just by managing properly the forest, we generate a lot of plant material. That's what the word biomass means, plant material. In Florida, we're looking at sugarcane bagasse because we have sugarcane. We're looking at sweet sorghum bagasse because we are growing sweet sorghum. We're not targeting the food component of the crops. We're not interested in the sugar. We're interested in the bagasse, which is the fiber that is considered waste material. It's not waste material. It's a source of bioplastics and fuels and all kinds of things. That's where we need to change our mentality, but we got to get those technologies in the marketplace. They cannot stay in the lab. Otherwise, no change is going to happen. And oilseed crops, inedible oilseeds, such as carinata, and I will expand on that a little more, as well as used vegetable oils and fats, animal fat. Those things can be readily converted into aviation fuel and biodiesel and other products. So the research focus areas are algae. We're looking at how we can grow them more efficiently and how we can synthesize the end products that we're interested in. The oilseeds, we're trying to develop carinata into biodiesel and aviation fuel. The biomass, We are using biochemical processing, enzymes and microorganisms to synthesize organic acids that will be polymerized into bioproducts. And all of those things need to be enveloped by policy that governments can pursue, so that it's not enough to be talking about this. We need to implement policy that will move society towards a more sustainable basis. Starting with the algae research, I know this is really busy. Let me highlight some things here. We're using marine algae. Why are we using marine and not fresh water? Because water is scarce. I want to stay away from using potable water. I would rather use marine water. There is plenty of marine water, so seawater in other words. And those algae, they grow in this water, so that's great. And as you see in the first step, what we do is we have the algae over here. What we need to feed them is sunlight. They are what we call, they are photosynthetic, just like plants. So I don't need to feed them any sugars. All I have to do is expose them to a lot of sunlight. Unlike today, on other days, they would grow very, very fast. On a cloudy day like today, they would slow down, but that's okay. We take the average and we see how we're doing. So expose them to sunlight and give them CO2. So we realize now that algae can act as a sink of CO2. Remember, CO2 is the cause for the blanket of CO2 that is warming up the earth. So algae represent another way, in addition to plants, who photosynthetically can absorb CO2, which is great. What else we need to give them? We need to give them some nutrients, nitrates and phosphates. It sounds like, and water, right? It sounds like if I can get my hands on some dirty water with some fertilizers, they can feed the algae. So that's great. I can take dirty water and recycle, not let it go into the ocean and pollute. Bring it to the algae. They will clean it up. They love that kind of water. And what happens once we grow the algae, and a lot of my work has to do on how cost effectively grow the algae, then we can harvest them, and we can go all kinds of directions. Just to point out the end products here that include, as you see there, jet fuel, diesel and naphtha. We can produce animal feed, biodiesel, nutraceuticals, chemicals. A wide range of products that really are needed in today's society. And I said earlier, we are focusing on cultivation. As you can see, we start very small. We start in the lab, and then we go big into larger sizes and larger sizes. Eventually, we get to this point here, where we have developed commercial size units that can be replicated in series or in parallel, and they can produce the thousands and millions of kilos eventually of algae that we envision being cultivated and used as a source of lipids, phospholipids, and other things. We start indoors always, so first we need to understand it's a living creature. So we need to find the best environment. What does it like and dislike, so that we can make it as cost effective as possible. So we start with the systems that you see here, trying to study all kinds of parameters, generate a lot of data. You see here we study all kinds of parameters exactly to understand what is the best environment they prefer, so we can provide it to them eventually when we go outdoors in large scale. A lot of the intellectual property that we are developing has to do with the design of an outdoor cultivation system. As you see, it looks like a raised pond, a pond that is circulating the algae in the water, but we cover it with plastic. So there is no water evaporation, which is a big issue with open ponds. And at the same time, because it's enclosed, we protect the algae from competing organisms. So we prevent contamination, as we call it. Because if other species get in there, they will suppress and maybe stop the growth of algae. I only want to grow algae in there. I don't want to be growing other things. So this is some ways of achieving that. And what we do is we realize lower capital cost. You see, my top line is always, because it's applied research, I'm trying to close the gap between academia and industry. my first consideration, even from the early designs, is this going to take us into a path of crazy expensive operating and capital costs, or there is promise? So one of the criteria in designing the system is, yes, it can give us a lower capital cost, so we can make the algal products more cost competitive. High productivity, low water use, very important, as I mentioned earlier. Low energy use. If we're going to be sustainable, we got to use low energy, low water, low everything, right? And includes low cost. And you see some other advantages there that we are shooting for. And then we take those outdoors. So now these studies are not anymore in the lab, but they are in the real world, under real conditions. There I cannot control the climate. So they will perform depending on the climate. It just happens that Florida is a great place. There is a study by the Department of Energy, US Department of Energy. I was not part of the study, but I will accept gladly their conclusion that Florida is the best place in the US to grow algae, which is great because it motivates investors now to come to Florida and look for collaborations. So that works for us very well. No complaints there. And we've been able to run these for a long time. This data here is over half a year with this cycle of growing, harvesting, growing, harvesting, growing, harvesting. What we harvest, we extract the end product. But we keep going, all right? So we don't need to start from zero, from scratch. We keep going. And the results so far have been excellent in terms of productivity. Don't worry about the numbers. But just take my word that when you look at the literature, when you talk to industry, these numbers look very promising. So that makes us more and more optimistic that we are getting somewhere. And then we want to see, is there any way to further improve this system? So that's when math comes into play. And that's where, you know, the chemical engineering part of the equation plays the role of looking at fluid dynamics. In the reactor design, what you see there on the right is the paddle wheel. The paddle wheel is what provides the motion so that the water can circulate. Are we designing it right? Is there a way to make it more efficient? Okay? So after we do the math, we do some simulations. The areas you see as blue are troublesome because they indicate slow movement. And slow movement means that the algae may not be staying in circulation. It may drop to the bottom of the reactor and becomes non-productive. So we want to eliminate, and that's where these tools are very useful. We are changing the design. We don't spend any time or money. We're doing that on the computer. And we're trying to find out which design can reduce those blue areas so that we have good agitation and therefore higher productivity. The end product is things like that. The omega-3 fatty acids is something that is excellent for, is needed for our metabolism, for good health. And you know, we get omega-3 fatty acids from where? From fish. But guess what? Fish is the middleman. It really comes from the algae that the fish consume in the ocean. So why not bypass the middleman, right? And get the omega-3 straight from the algae? Makes sense. We can still use the fish for protein, so as a protein source. But we can produce large amounts of omega-3 fatty acids for the entire world. Not only the developed countries where we have access, but also the developing countries where poverty and other reasons prevent them from having access to such essential nutrients. On the left, you see some dry algae. These are from our reactors I showed you, and they are ready to be processed into whatever product we want. The reason we use algae is no competition with food, right? You go to the restaurant, you're not going to find algae as a dish, right? Some in Asia, in Southeast Asia, you may find in Japan, you may find some algae products, but by far, algae is not considered a food source. No land use change. We don't need to grow the algae on land that we're used to grow crops. Especially in our system, we are growing the algae in those contained. I don't care what the soil quality is. I will go for the cheapest land, right? That nobody's going to use for anything else Therefore, there is no land use change. You may ask, is there going to be enough of that land? Most likely not. But we'll deal with it when we get to that point. Fast production, CO2 sequestration, and they can use wastewater, so I cannot spend good type of water. They give us a wide range of products. I mentioned the omega-3, but also we get beta-carotene, astaxanthin, phospholipids, you name it, and precursors for plastics. I will explain that in a second. This is from the PhD work of a student who is trying to develop phospholipids for cosmetics from algae. As you can see, he spends in the lab quite a bit of his time trying to grow these things. And for those of you who are not working with biological systems, you are lucky. Because those creatures, they decide to change their behavior in the middle of the night, or guess what? Usually in the middle of the weekend. So you got to get the student back to make sure that the culture doesn't fail and he has to repeat it. So they look good. Again, we grow them, and then we do further studies on that. And this is very interesting. This is a different type of project where after we take out the omega-3 fatty acids from the algae, we are left with the residue, right? What is left behind, which is a lot of cell mass. What do we do with it? Well, some people say use it as a fertilizer. Now, from a business standpoint, you're not going to get a high price for a fertilizer. Fertilizers are not expensive. So we started thinking, well, can we do something that is going to give us a higher value product? So one of the crazy ideas was, what if we pyrolyze? We, in the presence of catalysts, we raise the temperature and we kind of eventually gasify the residue of the algae. And playing with a different, collaborating with a chemical engineering professor who specializes in catalysis, we joined our forces, and we found out that that gas is quite rich in 2 carbon and 3 carbon molecules, which are basically ethylene and propylene, which are the starting material for polyethylene, right? And polypropylene, which are the most popular plastics. So interesting. How far this is going to go? Honestly, I don't know. The economics are not very favorable. But then again, we may identify more promising catalysts. We may identify cheap sources of algae, such as the red tide. You already heard about the red tide down in Florida. It's toxic algae that is nobody wants to get close to. And I keep getting calls, can you come and pick it up? It's like, well, I'm not in that service. But the question is, can we do something with all this algae that is lying there and interfering with the quality of life of people and pets and everybody else? We haven't solved the question, that question yet, so we're working on that. Yes?
So what's the penetration depth of light through algae in your tank? Like how?
Just a few centimeters.
So essentially I need, and how much mass is that? Like, how much mass can I get out of a few centimeters?
Concentration-wise, we are able to reach 4 or 5 grams per liter, which sounds very dilute, but it's 10 times more than what you usually find in nature.
But that still means I have to have a huge area.
Yes.
To produce anything meaningful in terms of quantity, correct?
Yes, you have to process a lot of water to recover that mass that is significant enough. Yes.
That's why you have to go for high-value products. Otherwise
Yes, exactly. That contributes, and also you got to do something with that water. These are millions of gallons that need to be reused. Otherwise, forget about sustainability. You know, go do something else. I think that's the problem. You're absolutely right. And then the other area is biomass. Any plant material contains cellulose and hemicellulose. These are the 2 natural polymers. They are sources of sugar. And sugar is very important because if I can make renewable, cheap sugars, then I can ferment them into all kinds of products. I can make pharmaceuticals, I can make biofuels, all kinds of things. So sugar is the holy grail there, renewable sugars. And this is again another diagram that I'm not going to bore you. It starts with biomass. It goes through a number of steps. Just to emphasize the biochemical nature, we use enzymes and we use fermentation. So that makes it a biochemical process, very important. We do generate some CO2. Let me see if the pointer is going to cooperate with us. Here is some CO2. We don't let it go into the atmosphere. We sell that to Soda companies, Coke and Pepsi, love this kind of CO2 because it's good quality CO2 and they can carbonate their products. And eventually we produce ethanol, organic acids, all kinds of things, even some electricity and steam that we can utilize so we can become less dependent on fossils while we are running this operation itself. Because to make renewable products, burning fossils doesn't make any sense, right? We got to walk the talk. So we should use renewable energy to make renewable products. That's the idea there. So this is the emphasis for our work is on improving, understanding the enzymatic hydrolysis and also the fermentation. And we study a lot of things that will allow us to optimize the process. And in the case of making organic acids, just wanted to show you something here. We found out, if you look at the end product of the desirable product here is the succinate. Simply put, it's a 4-carbon molecule, right? And we realized that in the metabolism of this bacterium, CO2 is incorporated to make succinate. So this CO2 goes into the metabolism to generate succinate. So we thought, you know what? If we make the environment in which this bacterium grows CO2 rich, maybe we will encourage this pathway as opposed to these pathways that generate products that we are not after. And it worked. So by maintaining CO2 in the reactors where we grow the bacterium, we are incentivizing the bacterium to go towards the desirable 4-carbon succinic acid or succinate product as opposed to going to formic, acidic, or ethanol. In our case, we're interested in that. Now, if you're in the business of making maybe ethanol or acetate, you don't want to do that. But that's okay. We can manipulate, without genetics yet, we can manipulate the organism, the way we grow it, so that it can become useful to our needs. Okay? And then you see here, organic acid production is the red curve, and the rest represent the co-products, but by far, most of the end product is the succinate, and the line that drops is the sugar. The fourth project I mentioned is carinata. That is a cousin of, are you familiar with canola and camelina? So they all belong to the same family, the mustard species family. The difference is that carinata is not edible. So we're not touching food. I'm not going after canola. Okay? It's an inedible plant. It contains a lot of oil. 45% of the mass of the seeds, it makes seeds. 45%, almost half of the mass of the seed, is oil. That oil, we will crush the seeds and we will make aviation fuel. We're making aviation fuel out of this, all the way to the end product that airliners are using. What is left, we call it meal. It's fiber. So we are trying to make value-added products from the fiber as well. If we are going to make this commercial, surviving just on one product, which is the aviation fuel, is not going to make it. We need multiple. We need a portfolio of products. And then, based on market conditions, we can direct more of our process towards product A or B or C, which is great to have. With some additional capital expenditures, I can have a plant that can be modified in terms of running towards producing A, B, C, D, whatever the products are. That gives us a lot of flexibility from a business standpoint. And we found out that it grows well in wintertime in the southeastern US, Florida, Georgia, Alabama. Now, have you been to Florida in wintertime? Well, winter is a euphemism. I mean, it's not winter. It's like spring. So we have like 5-6 months of spring, which is beautiful. Very mild conditions. Okay? Now what happens is the farmers, in summertime, they grow corn, peanuts, soybeans, but in wintertime, they grow nothing. So those fields are just sitting there, nothing growing on them, no revenue, and actually, through erosion, we are losing topsoil. And you know, topsoil is extremely important from a nutritional standpoint. So not only they are sitting, the fields are sitting non-productively there, but the quality of the fields is worsening over time. So our proposition to the farmers is, in addition, not in place, in addition of their summer crop, we are giving them an opportunity to grow carinata as a winter crop. And we, the consortium, making contracts with the farmers, we're going to buy the seeds from them. So they have secured, through a contract, a second income, which is great for them and for rural development. Goes back to what I mentioned earlier. And what we are looking at is making aviation fuel, as well as specialty chemicals and animal feed from the seeds of carinata. I know, this is crazy complicated, but again, the point of this slide is the end products. It's amazing how many things we can do. And if you focus for a second on the upper part here, we can start making nylon, renewable nylon. This is not theory, this is actually happening. Okay, so if you start making bioplastics, this really looks promising to us. Not just making fuels, which we're making anyway, but getting now into more consumer products that can really change the basis of our economy to a more sustainable one. And these are the partners in this big project. The University of South Florida, the University of Florida, University of Georgia, and Auburn. Very important for the consortium, we have the private sector with us, industry. Both the seed company, which is a Canadian company, Agrisoma, and also we have the chemical industry that is going to convert the oil into aviation, diesel, and naphtha. So we close the value chain from the seeds all the way to the end product. We also have with us the US Department of Agriculture and the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. This is a product that's going to go into planes, right? So we got to have FAA approval. So we got a 5-year project funded by the USDA, good funding from the USDA. And with this kind of funding, you can really make a difference. Otherwise, I think you are kidding yourself. There won't be much you can accomplish. The goal is to develop a sustainable bioeconomy in the southeastern US using carinata. And our thrust areas are technology development, obviously. We're looking at supply chain issues. I have colleagues in the business school where we look at the logistics and supply chain resiliency, very important. Don't forget that multidisciplinary approach. Community engagement. We want to get the farmers engaged. We want to educate the public and also prepare the students so they can get jobs in this bioeconomy. Speaking of that, this is the approach we're taking with workforce development. We are educating teachers about sustainability. Look, if I go and I speak to the teacher about carinata, he or she will most likely get bored within the first 30 seconds or 60 seconds. I mean, it's like, carinata, what are you talking about? So I got to go with the big picture first. What's the big picture? Sustainability. Now you get everybody's attention, right? From sustainability, we go to sustainable agriculture. Are you with me? They are still very interested. And then we go to carinata. And then we sell the story about winter crop and soil erosion and all those things. So that's very important. We are offering seminars, workshops, where the teachers come. We provide them the knowledge and the material. We don't tell them what to take into their classroom. We allow them to incorporate those concepts in existing classes. Could be biology, chemistry, environmental. They can squeeze it in. Because the kids love to hear and practice sustainability. It's becoming more and more of a driving force. Undergraduate research and obviously graduate research. And then very important, with industry partners, we offer the students internships. So they can go, they can leave the classroom, they can leave the lab, go to industry and get some real world, hands-on, experiential learning, some good experience. And then obviously pursue green jobs in the bioeconomy. The last part is sustainability policy. I explained earlier how important it is. Geographically, one of the areas of my interest are the small island nations. Lots of them in the Caribbean, right? But not just in the Caribbean, in the Pacific. And that's ground zero. These islands are ground zero with regards to climate change. There are island nations such as the Maldives in the Indian Ocean that the highest point is like a meter, above sea level, so you can see what can happen or what will happen. It's basically at sea level, and they will get devastated. Miami Beach, it floods every week now. Why? The tide. What happened with the tide? The moon is still there, right? Same distance. Did it get closer to us? No. So the gravitational forces are the same. What has changed? We got more water in the ocean. So when it rises now, I'm sorry. Yes, and that too, of course. It's where it's going to go. So now everybody sees around. You don't need even to convince someone about climate change, except for a few, of course. But anyway, so very interested in that. And I see sustainability and biofuels and sustainable agriculture as a means of improving the quality of life and securing the future of those islands. And the last thing that we are focusing on, and it's a very, very important component, especially of a university like ours that is a state university, is community partnerships. So the first point is I don't know if you have it here at McGill. Students they vote every 3 years, and they contribute $1 for every credit hour they enroll into the Green Energy Fund. This is a student green energy fund. USF, we collect about $1 million a year. And again, a body consisting of students and faculty identifies projects on campus that will make the campus greener. So we are looking at solar panels, we're looking at electric vehicle charging stations, water refill stations to reduce the use of plastic, bikes, you name it. Changing the insulation on the top of buildings to make them less energy hungry. So these are all steps. Again, this is voluntarily done. And the students, they have voted that so far for 6 years, they are contributing $1 each. And it allows us to get the students to get involved in these projects so they learn again. We are helping municipalities around Tampa with a greenhouse gas inventory so they can understand their operations, the baseline. And then we go into helping them to identify ways to reduce those carbon emissions. Very important. And some other things I mentioned the last one about K through 12 earlier. So that's about it. I have a couple of pictures from the lab. As I said, we have indoor and outdoor facilities. This is what we have in the lab, and which is very important. These are the outdoor facilities for algae. As you can see, these are bigger systems. The one on the right will look familiar, on the left looks familiar because it looks like the graphic I showed you earlier. And as you can see, there is a ground version and there is a floating version. The ground version is going to go to the customer, to someone who owns land and wants to deploy algae on land. But we realize that in some cases, deploying it on water makes more sense, not taking up the land. So we put a lot of emphasis on developing also a version of this product. We have a patent pending on that will float on the water. So we can utilize both types of topographies for growing algae. This is the group, quite multidisciplinary and working on all these things, and also quite international. And I want to close with a cartoon. I hope you're going to find it funny. Oh, before we do that, staying on the serious note, I promised you a slide about the Patel College of Global Sustainability. It's strictly a master's program, no undergraduate, because we believe that sustainability is not a discipline, but rather a way of life that needs to be instilled in all the disciplines. Okay? So it wouldn't make sense to teach it as an undergraduate foundation, but rather to accept students from any field into the program. And through a master's level education, get them to understand sustainability and apply it to their own disciplines. That's what we're doing. We hope to have a PhD program later on. So the students come from all undergraduate backgrounds. We have counted over 100 different backgrounds, literally from A to Z. I have anthropology and I have zoology. Okay, I got everything covered. It's on campus and online. Find the online, but personally I prefer the on campus if the students can come. However, we also have some professionals. They work full-time. They may not be able to come to classroom. They can take at least some of the courses online. We have expats I have students, US students in Taiwan and in China. They want to change their career into sustainability. They enroll into the program with distance learning. 30 credit hours. It can be completed in 1 to 2 years. Most of the students go for the 2 years. And there is a mandatory internship at the very end of the program. So we get them out of the campus. They need to go into doing an internship with an organization, a company, government, you name it. So it's mandatory, and they need to write a report and be approved by the internal supervisor and also the external supervisor. So they have 2 supervisors, one in the private sector or wherever they are doing this, and one from the college. And we offer 9 concentrations. So every student needs to focus on one area. And those concentrations are energy, water, food, tourism, policy, climate change. Then we move into business, sustainable business, and entrepreneurship. And finally, transportation. All right? And the jobs that they get are usually with industry, government, NGOs. Some of our students start their own businesses. We have a student who started their own business making clothing from recycled fibers. So no more throwing the clothes, into the trash and ending in the landfills. And I think the cartoon is next. And the base of the cartoon is, you keep hearing sustainability. Everybody talks about sustainability. So here's the cartoon. By the year 2100, 2109, all sentences are just the word sustainable, repeated over and over again. It's a joke. All right. Thank you so much, and I'll be glad to entertain your questions.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'm not going to say sustainable at all now.
Avoid the use of the...
Absolutely. So thank you very much. That was really interesting. I have questions. I'm
Yes.
sure other people have questions. So, oh my goodness, too many. 1 second. First I'm going to go over here, but we will. Yeah. The microphones apparently are all working. No, you just sit there and talk, apparently.
Okay. A very nice talk.
Thank you.
One of the products you try to make are polymers made from biodegradable monomers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, plastic pollution is one of the major global pollution problems.
Mm-hmm.
Making them from monomers which are biodegradable isn't going to change that. You will still have polymers that you cannot dispose of. And I noticed that you are sponsored in one of your projects by Coca-Cola, which is the major producer and seller of plastic bottles in the world, which 90% ends up in our oceans.
Yes, that's right.
Isn't that, and you call that sustainability?
Yes, it's you are absolutely right. The concepts of what is compostable, biodegradable, renewable, these are different. They are being confused, but you are absolutely right. Regardless of what is the origin of the monomer, the polymer is a polymer. That polymer is not going to biodegrade just because it has a memory that it came from a plant. It doesn't have that memory. So we still have to do a lot of work in making them biodegradable or reusable. I'm talking with a professor at the University of Florida about developing a program on design plastics, where we're going to introduce molecules in the plastic backbone of the polymer that we can trigger for biodegradability after the end of the life, the useful life. I think if we can accomplish that, that would be a step in the right direction. And you're right about corporate sponsors. We need to move with them. They are asking for bioplastics, and I can offer nothing. PLA, polylactic acid, is the only one you're going to find really out there, and still it comes from corn. There are issues with corn, right? And it's not degradable as degradable as they think or they say. So there is a lot of talk. There is a lot of greenwashing when we know that the polymer is a polymer, and unless you can accelerate their breakdown, they will be there for a very long time. So I appreciate where you're coming from with that.
Yes, I have a kind of engineering thing.
Yes.
Your mother must have had a lot of foresight to call you George, you know that.
Geo,
Geo is
yes.
Earth.
Yes.
Erg is Org is erg, work. You work on the earth.
I'm a farmer, yes.
And you're a farmer. That's
fake.
not my question, but I thought that was beautiful.
Thank you.
I have a question. Bill Gates just was announced that had spending hundreds of millions of dollars on nuclear, and he's looking for sustainable energy. Nuclear has one advantage, of course, because there's
Carbon free.
no carbon and unlimited supply of U-238 and all the rest of it. Would he be automatically working with you on something like that? I mean, he's in the States. He's always sending money all over the world. And now you have a couple of good American projects, including the nuclear one, by the way, which has a lot of potential.
Yes, it has a lot of potential. I mean, it's not fossil, but it's depletable. And so it does, we have that issue, it's not renewable. And the big concern I have is what do you do with the residue? We're going to send it to the moon. What are we going to do?
You're talking about the nuclear?
Yeah, the nuclear waste.
No, it's going to be liquid. It's something way ahead of itself.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, well, that's what they're working on right now.
Okay, but
that's the only complaint.
Yes, but it is a significant complaint because how are we going to dispose of that? Where are we going to put it? Nobody wants it in their backyard.
Well, I was a nuclear engineer, and if you go to Douglas Point in Ontario, which Ontario is 70% nuclear, energy-wise, there's an Olympic-sized pool, and they started to put the rods in there 70 years ago, and it hasn't filled up yet. All they're doing is cooling off the rods. That's all they have.
Well,
mind you,
yes,
life of more than 70 years.
But then again, right now, nuclear in the US, at least, it covers what? Less than 20% of the electricity that is generated.
Well, there's 100 nuclear power plants in the United States right now.
So multiplying that will generate more. I don't know if you can keep it.
I want Bill Gates' money come to you. That's the whole. Thank you.
I'll work on that.
Okay.
Thanks. Yes. Go ahead.
When you were talking about planting carinata as a winter crop and the impact on soil erosion and quality, that's pretty relevant to the Quebec context right now because we're losing the quality of our topsoil in a lot of areas. Is that already proven as an effect, or is that something that the 15 million going into that project is hoping to establish?
Yes, we need to establish it with data. Okay, so we're looking into that. But pretty much we have data from other cover crops.
Yes.
That they are doing that, so we would expect that carinata would help in doing that. So, by the way, it's also cultivated in the Dakotas and in Canada. As I said, Agrisoma started. It is a Canadian company. They started here, and then they brought it. So, but here in the Dakotas and in maybe Saskatchewan, I'm not sure where exactly in which province, it's as a summer crop. So, what is summer here conditions? Which is not very harsh, it's the equivalent of our winter conditions. So there is promise beyond the southeast. In our case, it really helps because we are complementing the summer crop. So the farmer has two crops. Now, as far as I know, in the Dakotas, they're not going to grow anything when it's frozen, right? So there is the land use issue definitely more than with us. Yes?
I was just wondering, I keep reading these articles about people growing these algae farms in the oceans for some of the similar reasons that you mentioned, but I was just wondering, could you comment on the effect on kind of local biodiversity in the water by having so much algae around?
In terms of what, use of water?
I just wonder whether it affects, which species flourish.
It hasn't, I don't have any, it hasn't affected yet because really the industry is in its infancy. It's not really commercial, I wouldn't call it commercial. The biomass industry has become commercial, it's growing. The algae is nowhere close to commercial yet because we still have the cost issue. And the sustainability of how do we handle the water? We spoke about the water earlier, so much water that needs to be handled. As far as impact on water quality, it all depends on how we manage the so-called wastewater from those facilities. And definitely, I cannot imagine we're going to be profitable by having millions of gallons leaving our operation and going into anywhere. That water needs to be turned back. So I envision having some cleanup process where we remove maybe some ingredients from it, and then the bulk of the water is going to go back to be used again and again and again until at some point we need to purge some of the water, obviously, because of the accumulation of nutrients and other things, but eventually any of these technologies will have to rely on energy integration and water integration as well.
Yeah, for the algae program, about 10 years ago, Shell did a huge pilot scale study. It seems like they stopped. You know, what's the story?
Shell or Exxon?
Shell also, both Shell and
Shell, I'm not very familiar with how much Shell did. By far, the Exxon announcement of investing $500 million over the next 10 years, it's happening. It's happening. It's happening. They are investing in the company called Synthetic Genomics, and they are making progress. But because of intellectual property, I don't know at what stage they are. What I know from colleagues and friends in the industry is that they are making progress. That's a good amount of money to invest into science. So.
And I know that the Shell's first one made a huge pilot scale study. They built a huge area and trying to do. Somehow they stopped.
Yes, it did. And what Exxon did is they believe that by manipulating the metabolism of the algae, that's why they're investing in genetics, they will be able to develop strains that will be more productive and more resilient, so they can grow year-round without, much of a problem. The question is, what is going to be the environmental regulations when you put genetically engineered algae out in the open? And that remains to be seen, because there are concerns about the genetic material leaving the algae and ending up somewhere else.
Only Trump knows that, eh?
Yeah, I don't know if you have a communication line with anybody there. You can ask them. Yes.
In your biomass project, you started from glucose and then converted to malic and succinate, I guess.
Yes.
And the other pathway was going toward ethanol or what?
Yes.
Knowing that the bioethanol market is very large, do you know what's the market size of the other products in like malic and succinate?
They are orders of magnitude less.
And then should we still be interested in that pathway?
That's a good question. If we're talking about, it's good to talk about markets, but there is a risk of saturating those markets with what you produce. Right now, we're not there yet. Succinic acid is being produced from petroleum, and they started producing it now from sugars, from edible sugars. Still, that's not sustainable. What we're saying here is definitely no to petroleum, but even no to edible sugars. So we're going the extra step of using the technology to convert the residue of agricultural residue, the biomass, into those sugars and fermenting those sugars. From that point on, not much changes. It's the same as edible sugars. It's the upstream part that is different. We need to use it to be able to make use of agricultural residues, cellulose and hemicellulose, the natural polymers that are not digestible, and therefore they're not a food component for us as humans. Okay? Cows can, and they do feed because they have the enzymes inside their stomach. So
your method is enzymatic? Or?
Enzymatic, yes. Those enzymes I showed there, you can find them in the cow's stomach. They do it naturally. So we're trying to do it in an environment. Yes?
So you just mentioned that one does not use fossil fuels to transform what is normally, from an agricultural point of view, waste into something useful. How much fossil fuel is on collecting this stuff, transporting it to a facility, compared to if I do this, if I take fossil fuels or gas right from the beginning? Essentially, it's a concentration and dilution challenge there, no?
My statement was on a life cycle basis, and the studies I have seen for cellulosic biomass is we're talking about 80% lower greenhouse gas emissions per gallon of fuel equivalent gasoline based to the oil product, gasoline itself. That's on a life cycle. So it takes into account all the things that you mentioned, or it's supposed to.
What's the error bar on that? Is that fact?
I don't recall. I say around 80%. There are claims for 90%, but it's pretty significant. And the same happens to be the case also with sugarcane ethanol. The reason there is that sugarcane, although it's a food, it does use entirely for its power, for powering their operation, they use the bagasse, the leftover. So the corn industry can make strides in the same direction if they start using less natural gas and more of their residues in the field to burn. So again, I don't know the error bar on that. I don't recall, but
I mean, all these things have assumptions in them that
yes.
have certain certainties. So,
yes.
You know, and
those uncertainties, they pile up. And
takes the favorable ones to make whatever statement one wants to make.
Yes. The other thing I didn't mention is we keep talking about the U.S. really doesn't have any leadership. Let's put it this way, on renewable energy or biofuels or aviation fuels. So it's funny, we use, because it's so global, the economy and especially aviation, the fact that Europe has those stricter regulations towards carbon emissions by the aviation industry serves us very well. It's enough to oblige all the airliners, European, US and otherwise, to pursue that. So we are using the policy in another part of the world as a leverage to push for the development of a greener economy. It's fine. But when we, hopefully we're going to move into a market-driven rather than a policy-driven era. And it's happening with wind energy. It's cheaper than coal and natural gas. And I think within the next 5 years, the way the prices of solar are dropping, we will not need any federal or state policy.
So for solar, the crossover happened 3 years ago. It's now a factor of 3 less expensive per gigawatt to install solar than fossil.
Yes, the solar is not there yet because the economies of scale are not there yet, but we're getting there. So when we hit $1 per watt installed, that's kind of the whole.
Cheaper solar 3 years ago than fossil. It's Nature Energy article a year ago. That crossover has happened. The storage is a problem. Right?
Yes, and in many parts of the world where energy is expensive, there it's a no-brainer. You can deploy it, but we have other issues. We have corruption, politics, all kinds of things.
Okay, so we've got 2 more questions here, and then we're going outside. There's wine and food, so you can quiz George a little bit more there.
And on Wednesday, I'll be back in Florida if you want to come. Let's say January, February. You pick the month. Yes?
Nature has gone through extreme lengths to polymerize glucose into cellulose.
Yes.
And it's a marvelous molecule with exceptional properties. Now we're breaking it down again into glucose. Isn't that a bit crazy? Why not try to make as much use of the polymerized form of cellulose and make all kinds of useful products, sustainable products out of it?
There are uses for cellulose, but definitely the big driver here is the monomer, simply because we're going to put it to use through fermentation. So it is a shame that we are breaking it down, and it's not easy. Mother Nature also has come up with lignin that protects the cellulose so well that we have to put a lot of energy into opening up the structure. Believe me, we're looking for other sources of sugars, and I think when we find them, not only from an environmental but also from an economic standpoint, it costs money to break it down. It's a good part of my cost is the cost of breaking it down. Not as much the fermentation. It's up there in the front end, upstream. So I don't have the answer, but yes, sir.
I have an observation from small island nations, Papua New Guinea, Samoa. When I was doing work there in the communities, a lot of people came to blow algae from the ocean, saying these things have grown since the ocean has gotten warm and the fish are running away. That thing they showed me, I suppose it's algae, right? I'm an economist.
Yeah.
What can you do with it? Is it something you can do with it?
Yeah, when you have rather small amounts, because when we talk about economies of scale, we're talking about thousands of tons. But I would imagine they have maybe a few kilos or something like that on dry basis. Yeah. They can put it to use, if it is algae indeed. Was it seaweeds or microalgae?
I don't know.
Did it look like a plant?
They hang up. I have pictures somewhere.
Yes.
To show you.
If it is seaweed,
yeah.
Anyway, regardless of what it is, it contains nutrients.
Right.
So putting it in the soil makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
As long as you make you make sure that you don't. The salinity is an issue. You don't put a lot of salt in the soil, and then you are affecting the quality. But my reaction would be, if you cannot do anything else, use it as soil amendment. It makes a fertilizer. You are putting nutrients from the ocean or back into the soil. So that would be the simplest thing to do, because nothing else can be really cost effective. Everything else would cost instead of generating a revenue. So soil amendment would be the easiest, simplest thing to do.
Okay, so on the economic note, we will end here. And once again, can you join me in thanking George?
Thank you.